Newsfirst, Newsline.
A very good evening to you. You're watching Newsline. Today too we are going to talk about an important topic. We are going to talk about the GSP Plus and why Sri Lanka is in this situation right now where there is a review against the country and whether in the future we will lose the GSP Plus status for our country. We are going to talk to Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke about this. He has been advising the Foreign Ministry from time to time regarding the GSP Plus situation in the country. So we thought of talking to him. Dr. Gehan, thank you for being here with us on the show. To sort of get an understanding, let's put some context into it. Let's start from the history. Now, we know that we lost GSP Plus in 2010, and then in 2017 we got it back. People may be aware of that situation, but beyond that, if you go a bit further than that, we don't know why we got selected to enjoy GSP Plus in the first place. Let's start from there.
So that's a good question, Chathuranga. We started the whole process back in 2005. What happened was the EU had a particular instrument they called GSP Plus that they offered certain vulnerable countries that would qualify along certain World Bank criteria. So if you were either a low-income country or a low-middle-income country, you would qualify in terms of the economic component. And then you would be provided this tariff concession scheme based on your compliance with respect to several international treaties, 27 conventions. These conventions span human rights, environmental law, and labor. So these are the subjects of these 27 conventions. So essentially in 2005 we qualified on the economic scale, and we had ratified all these conventions.
Right.
So we were able to actually apply for this particular trade concession. However, what happened, and you mentioned it already, by 2010 there was a review of how well we were actually implementing those conventions. And in 2010, the EU decided to suspend GSP Plus concessions to Sri Lanka on the basis of several conditions not being met. And there was a letter that was sent to the External Affairs Ministry at the time, setting out these 15 conditions, and that letter is freely available. In fact, I have a copy of it. What it basically said was, if we are able to meet these conditions, we would be restored that facility and we'll be able to resume our status of GSP Plus. We managed to resume that status only in 2017. But really, if you go through the conditions, it's very clear that what it was basically asking us to do is to fulfill the obligations we had already taken on by ratifying those conventions. So it's a little bit of a easy sell in that sense, because what the trade concession scheme is asking the country to do is to fulfill its obligations that it has already taken on by ratifying certain treaties.
Right.
So it's not asking us to do anything extra. So we should be essentially fulfilling these obligations regardless of these incentives, because we have actually ratified these treaties. But what GSP Plus tries to do is to basically incentivize countries to fulfill those international obligations, and in exchange they would get certain trade concessions, tariff concessions, which have had an enormous impact on the countries that actually secured the facility.
Dr. Gehan, now, this being the background, when we come and look at it now,
yes,
we see again we are going to go in for a review, and they've moved a resolution in the EU Parliament. But the Prevention of Terrorism Act, PTA, it seems to be the main focus in this time when it comes to the review. But the PTA and issues surrounding the law of our land are problems that our government needs to handle and not be influenced by these international, or the West, let's call it, for this purpose. And when you look at it, are they trying to sort of squeeze our arm and try to get us, don't go towards China? Is that what's actually happening?
So that's an interesting question. Essentially, we have to go back in time again, right? So when the new government came in 2015, one of the main objectives of the Foreign Ministry at the time was to try and re-secure GSP Plus. And that particular setup was to look at the conditions, the 15 conditions that were found in the 2010 letter, and try to fulfill each of them one by one so we can get GSP Plus. So out of the 15, and I was involved in this process at the time, I was advising the foreign ministry, we sent a team several times to Brussels, people came to Colombo, there were talks and negotiations about how we can actually satisfy these conditions. No one was holding a gun to our head in terms of getting this concession. It's up to us to either get it or not. Right? So I didn't see that as interference. It's basically a concession scheme. If we want to apply for it, these are the criteria. Right. If you don't want to apply for it, no problem. Right? So essentially, we wanted to apply for it, and what we did was one by one, we tried to convince the European Commission that these conditions could be met, and certain steps were taken. Now, the only condition out of those 15 conditions that was pending was the PTA. Now, let me tell you exactly what the ask was. What was the demand? The demand was not to repeal the PTA. The demand, and Chathuranga, I have the letter with me. Yeah, it was very clear. The demand was to revise certain sections of the PTA. Right. And now we have to look at what those sections were. Basically, the sections that dealt with detention for 18 months, having confessions admissible in a court of law, confessions to police officers being admissible in a court of law, not being able to produce a suspect before a magistrate. Right? So these are things that are inconsistent with our constitution. Forget the international law for a second. These are things that are fundamentally at odds with our constitutional values. Understood. Right? The PTA was meant to be a temporary law that came in 1979. Unfortunately, it became a permanent fixture. Yeah. And if we were going to have it as a permanent fixture, there were certain things about it that needed to be tweaked. Correct. So what this condition was basically asking us to do was to bring the PTA in line with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Incidentally, another convention we have ratified, and we have also passed a law, the ICCPR Act, which was designed to actually bring our law fully in compliance with that particular convention. Correct. So that was all that was being asked. So we could have done something very simple, that is to tweak the PTA to make sure that these specific provisions are not only compatible with the ICCPR, compatible with our constitution. And I think that would be the end of the story. Right. Unfortunately, we were not able to do that. As a result of which, this PTA matter has always been pending. And when the current government began to reinforce the PTA against certain individuals, naturally, this matter came up again. And the European Parliament passed this resolution. Yes.
Gehan, interestingly, there is the review period has to end. The review period commences next year, and there is time for Sri Lanka. And then Dinesh Gunawardene, the Honorable Foreign Minister, has also informed that we are discussing the PTA, we are discussing these issues that we are facing. But the only thing that seems to be linking all of this together is there is this US resolution happening on the side as well about the LTTE, and then there is now a EU parliamentary resolution. But the only thing that the common denominator in all of this seems to be the power from the West trying to interfere in matters in Sri Lanka. And this comes against the backdrop where we as a country have signed the Port City Commission bill also. That was the only thing that was international that happened in the country in the past maybe 6-7 months. So again, it's fair for someone to just look at it and say, no, this is happening because we are siding the Chinese. And why I'm backing that up is even the resolution also points towards something like that. It insinuates that we are getting too close to China. Is that what's actually happening?
I mean, geopolitics is something that you have to consider in all of this, right? And I think it's completely disingenuous to say that geopolitics doesn't play a part in this. Of course, geopolitics plays a part in this. However, I don't want to get caught up with the geopolitics because we have to look at the issue objectively. Does our PTA require amendment or not? Right. That's the fundamental question. Did we promise that we would bring it in line with the ICCPR when we got GSP Plus in 2017? Now it's 2021. Right. 4 years have passed. I think it's a wonder that this was kept going for this long. Right. Right. We had an opportunity year after year, and then of course COVID hit. We've been given a lot of leeway in actually meeting a very simple condition, a condition that we should have fulfilled at the inception. And essentially, I think if we make a promise, we have to keep it. Right. Otherwise, we have to say, no thanks. We don't want GSP Plus because we can't meet that promise. But if we made a promise, we have to be willing to look at what exactly that promise was and fulfill it. And what I'm telling you, Chathuranga, is that it is not difficult to actually fulfill this particular promise. There's a lot of misinformation as to what these conditions are. No one is asking the government to repeal the PTA. It's asking the government to do what it's already promised to do. Now, even the Foreign Secretary, he made a very progressive statement recently about wanting to, amend the PTA. So now, why not do that? And it need not be a complete overhaul. Look at the specific provisions that are problematic, that are clearly being abused today, and then fix it. And it can be done quickly, because now you brought up the Port City bill, very complicated bill. No? Ultimately, they got it through very fast, right? Which means if they want to do something, they can do it. They can do it fast, right? They can push it through. So it depends now whether you really want to maintain this market, right? This market is supposed to be one of the most important markets to Sri Lanka, just like China. The European market is also important. It's important to the garment industry. It's important to several people who are exporting there. It's one of the largest markets, if not the largest market, right? So as much as China is important to Sri Lanka, so are the other players. So we shouldn't get trapped in this geopolitics of trying to play one against the other. We should be properly non-aligned. And what I mean by non-aligned is, don't take sides, make sure that we're working with everyone. And right now, not fulfilling our promise to the EU is hurting our economy, because ultimately it is the exporters that are going to suffer. And I don't think that's a wise geopolitical decision to make.
At this time, anyway.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. With that, Gehan, we have to quickly cross over to a commercial break. We'll check the headlines of the prime time bulletin and we'll be right back.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Welcome back. We are discussing the GSP Plus with Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke. Before we went into the break, we asked about the history and why it is so important for GSP Plus to be discussed properly. And now I'm going to question Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke about the communication. Doctor, when you're taking a look at it, if we have time, if we had the ability, is the problem about communicating what we are doing about the PTA to the European Parliament? Is that where the problem lies, or is there some sort of miscommunication? Do they think we are not doing anything, or are we actually not doing anything?
I mean, I'm not aware of any serious reform exercise to look at the PTA. I know some promises have been made. I'm not disputing that those promises have been made. I think those promises may have been genuine, but I don't know of any genuine exercise to reform the PTA. And let's talk solutions, right? Let's not just talk about the problem. If tomorrow the government wanted to take up a particular proposal and amend the PTA, there are proposals that are available. I know that they won't want to touch the counter-terrorism bill that the previous government came up with for various reasons, and I can understand that's politics. But what about the law commission draft that is available? That law commission draft was drafted by a group of very eminent legal personalities from various sort of backgrounds, right? It was a bipartisan effort to come up with a very, very simple piece of legislation. 8 pages, and it does the job. It does the job in terms of meeting all those specific issues. For example, I said 18 months detention, unreasonable. You don't need 18 months detention for individual. You can put the person in remand custody and produce him before a court, right? Now this particular draft, drafted by the Law Commission, it reduces it to 30 days, maximum detention. Right? After 30 days, you have to either remand or release. Then when it comes to producing a suspect before a judge, 72 hours. I think that's reasonable. You have to produce someone before a judge, and it's a judge who decides on the condition of the detainee. That's a very important safeguard.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Number 3, confessions. Don't let confessions to a police officer become admissible. We know that that's problematic, right? I don't have to tell you the problems that we are facing in that department. So make it a confession to a magistrate. So that's what this draft says. So if the government wanted a solution, it's available. It can be used tomorrow.
Right.
You can start the process. You can actually amend the PTA, or you can adopt this new law. And in terms of the national security side of things, you have to consult the experts, the specialists. I don't think there's any conflict or tension between protecting national security and meeting your basic constitutional obligations. These things are not incompatible.
Yeah.
So I think there are opportunities now available. It's up to the government to seize those opportunities and communicate that we are interested in maintaining this market, for not just for our foreign relations, but for the export community, for the people of the country, right?
Dr. Gehan, let's look at this from the point of view of the government.
Yeah.
Now, for the past 1.5 years, we have been battling with this COVID situation.
That's right.
And as a government too, the machine has been used mainly for this COVID operation.
Absolutely.
And then we have the European Union moving a resolution.
Yeah.
Yes, those countries seem to be a bit better at handling this situation. COVID management is a different topic altogether. I don't want to take you there.
Sure.
But the government has other priorities, at least now, and that is to keep the deaths at a certain level, keep the patients at a certain level. And when this happens, from the point of view of the government, is it fair to put all of this burden on the government right now? Maybe it could have come later. Yes, as you say, the PTA needs changes, and it was going to come. It was inevitable. But the timing is what I continuously question you on.
Sure. So
does that make sense?
That's an important question, Chathuranga. Let's look at the timing, right? So it is not as if the PTA is not being used at the moment. There are people that are actually being detained and potentially charged under the PTA, right? And there's a lot of discourse around it. There's a poet who has been held under the PTA. The lawyer Hijaz Hizbullah is held under the PTA. So it's not like the government isn't actually using this law. So when it's using this law, it can't expect people not to criticize its use. So if we are talking about a situation where the PTA is kept on a shelf and it's not being used and the focus is on COVID, I think then I would concede your point.
Right.
Absolutely right. It's not fair to really focus on something when it's not being used. But if it's being used and people are actually suffering as a result of this PTA, and this is not something that I'm saying. Even the government is acknowledging this, that the PTA is a problem,
right.
and that on various grounds we have to look at it. So if it is being used, then I think it also has to be on the top of the agenda in terms of amendment. And this is politics ultimately. I think the European Parliament has decided to hit hard when it matters, and now we have to respond like a grown-up country, right?
That is going to be my next question. The response of the government. Now, for example, there are obviously the two options. So we either make the changes that are required and we go before the EU Parliament and say, okay, we've made the changes, now review us in the positive light and give us back the GSP. Or we say, as you said, no, we don't want the GSP. Those two options have repercussions on various departments. That is a different debate altogether. But right now, if the government decides we don't want it, then does that mean that the government can then all of a sudden continue with the PTA and just don't look at that angle? What happens there?
I'll go back to my point at the beginning. Ultimately, what GSP Plus is asking the government to do is to fulfill its obligations that it should be fulfilling anyway.
Yeah.
It's a kind of like giving a parent a tax break for taking care of their children, right? So the parent is supposed to look after the children anyway, but then you're giving a tax incentive on top of that for something they should be doing anyway. So regardless of GSP Plus is just a trade concession. The PTA is fundamentally at odds with our own constitution and our international obligations. So I would leave GSP Plus aside and say even without GSP Plus, we should be looking at the PTA because it's problematic. People are actually suffering under the PTA. And this is something that's widely acknowledged. A law that was meant to be temporary, it's in the title of the act. It's the Prevention of Terrorism Temporary Provisions Act, except it's
now the PTA.
Now the PTA, it was passed in 1979. It's still on our statute books and being used every day. So in that context, I think it is very important that the government does not just look at this as a process of appeasing the West. It should be looking at it as a process of bringing its law in line with its own, with the country's own constitution. And Sri Lanka's obligations are serious, so we must take those obligations seriously and fulfill them. And the fact that we're getting an added bonus from that is a bonus. No, it shouldn't be the reason that we're changing our laws. And you're right, this is something that we really need to take seriously. and the repercussions will be quite serious if we don't. And the repercussions are not just in terms of reputation. It will be serious in terms of the economics of it, and there will be actual people that are going to lose out, and particularly the export community. I don't think in a situation where we're trying to preserve our foreign currency, we should be then exposing the country further to foreign currency outflows in the form of tariffs. I mean, that's common sense, right? Absolutely. So I think we need to be very careful here.
Very quickly, Dr. Gehan, now let's say, staying on the same subject, let's say the government decides to say no to the GSP. Is there worse things that can happen to Sri Lanka from the European Union and the European Parliament in terms of maybe going as serious as embargoes towards the country if we don't follow through with these promises that we have made? Or is it just, no GSP, that's it, end of the drama?
Well,
and end of
I can't speculate on that because those things are all possible. It all depends on how we manage relations, right? So there's a whole group of people whose craft it is to actually manage diplomatic relations. And those are the very people that got us GSP Plus. By going to Brussels, by meeting people who came from Brussels over and over again, and carefully negotiating this and actually securing it. So if you want to discard all of that work and say we don't want GSP Plus, that's possible, and we will have to face the economic consequences of that. I don't know whether that will necessarily lead to further sanctions. I think that will be unnecessary fear-mongering if someone says that. There's no evidence of that happening just
in
yet.
the past as well.
But I do think that the loss of GSP Plus alone is something that we shouldn't just allow. It's something, because why I'm telling you this is that the ability to fulfill these conditions is within our grasp. I mean, we can actually do it quite easily. It's not something that they're asking us to do that is so difficult that we'll actually never be able to fulfill it. It's actually within our grasp. So just a question of having the objectivity and setting aside our pride and doing it for the country. That's all it is.
Thank you, Dr. Gehan, for your time on Newsline and explaining to us. You can watch this discussion on our social media platforms and on YouTube as well. You have to search for #NewslineSL. So once again, Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke, thank you very much. He has been, he's an attorney at law and has been advising various governments about foreign policy as well. So thank you for your time. Now, another factor that is considered when you talk about our country's happenings at the moment is the turtles. The massive destruction that is caused in the marine environment at the moment. We have a small clip that highlights this serious issue, and we urge you to stay tuned to TV1 as we go into the English Primetime News as well. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Chathuranga Hapuarachchi.